It started with a lie, a small one. "It's just a weekend at the lake with family," Richard said, eyes barely flicking up from the TV screen as he tossed the comment into the air like it was nothing. And I, Helen Parker, 50 years old and too tired to argue, nodded like always. I went to the kitchen, made his dinner, and told myself it didn't matter. I had work, the house to keep clean, Ethan's laundry to finish. There was never time for me anyway, not for decades. But the lie wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how normal it all felt. Like being ignored, dismissed, unseen was just part of the routine. And maybe it was. It was a Friday afternoon when I met Carol at the little diner off Route 23. The same one we've been going to since our kids were in diapers. Carol ordered sweet tea and leaned across the table with that gleam in her eye. "I saw this promo," she said. "Outer Banks. 7 nights. Oceanfront. Half price for early bookings." I smiled politely like I always did. She kept talking about sunsets, sand between toes, and waking up to the sound of waves. I stirred my coffee. "You remember how we used to dream about seeing the ocean?" she asked. I did. I remembered it painfully well. We were both 7. We'd watched some travel special on her parents' old box TV. Endless blue waves, seagulls, boardwalks. I swore to myself then and there, I'd stand on that shore one day. I'd breathe that salty air and let it change me. But then life happened. I met Richard, got pregnant with Ethan, got promoted at the bank. And somewhere between tax returns and school lunches, that little girl with big dreams vanished. "I'm too old for that now," I said, smiling sadly. "Too many bills. Too many responsibilities." Carol shook her head, pulling out her phone and scrolling through pictures of a charming little inn by the water. "You're not dead, Helen. You're 50. We still have bones in our legs. And there are things you need that Richard is never going to give you. Like silence, sunlight, sanity." I laughed, but it was the kind that hurt a little in the chest. Later that night, I sat in the dark kitchen with a cooling cup of tea. Richard had fallen asleep on the couch again, socks on the coffee table, the remote still in his hand. I watched his chest rise and fall and wondered if he even knew who I was anymore, or if he cared. The next day, Carol texted, "Last day to book. I'm doing it. Come with me. 1 week. You need this." I hovered over the message for what felt like hours. Then Ethan barged in, dropped his gym bag on the floor, and asked if I could spot him a few hundred for rent. Again, "No, hi, Mom." "No, how was your day?" Just hands out, palms up, like I owed him the air he breathed. I didn't answer. Not right away. I went upstairs, opened the closet, pulled out the suitcase I hadn't used since my mother's funeral. It still smelled like mothballs and regret. I stared at it for a long time. That night, I told Richard over dinner. He didn't look up from his plate. "You're going where?" "To the Outer Banks. With Carol. Just a week." He laughed. "You? The beach? At your age?" I said nothing. He kept eating, then added, "You're out of your damn mind if you think I'm staying here and cooking for myself." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Then don't eat." For a moment, he froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. He blinked, like I'd just spoken in another language. "You're serious?" "I am." "Jesus, Helen. You're going to run off to the beach like some teenager on spring break." "No," I said calmly, like a woman who hasn't seen the ocean in 50 years. He scoffed. Ethan, sitting beside us, looked up from his phone just long enough to mutter, "Sounds nice, actually." But then he added, "Could you help me out before you go, though? Rent's due Monday." And that was it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just invisible, I was useful. A tool, a servant, and even that was taken for granted. So I nodded, packed my things quietly. And when the day came, Carol and I walked onto the platform with our tickets and our old lady beach bags. I thought the hardest part was behind me, but I'd forgotten one thing, my passport. And that mistake changed everything. We were already on the platform when I realized it. My heart stopped. I dug through my tote bag once, twice, then dumped the entire contents onto the bench. Lip balm, tissues, my wallet, my phone, no passport, no ID, nothing that would let me check in at the hotel or board the train. I left it, I whispered, at home, in the nightstand drawer. Carol looked at her watch. You've got maybe 30 minutes. Go, run. I didn't even answer. I just ran. The streets of Columbus blurred as I pushed past people, the morning air slapping against my cheeks. My legs hadn't moved that fast in years, but adrenaline will do strange things to a woman running from her own life. I didn't even notice the pain in my knees or the tightness in my chest. I just kept going. When I reached the house, it was quiet. Richard's truck was gone. I fumbled with the key, flew through the door, sprinted up the stairs. The drawer was half open as if mocking me. My passport sat right there, smug and flat and infuriating. I grabbed it, and then I heard the voice. Not in my head, not a memory. A real, living voice coming from our bedroom. Richard's voice. At first, I thought he'd come back and left the TV on. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. Kitten, I'm all yours for the next 2 weeks. My chicken flew the coop, finally. He laughed. That low, cocky laugh he used to have in his 20s. I froze. She left this morning, he continued, voice thick with smugness. Dragged her old suitcase behind her like she's going to find herself on a beach somewhere. Makes things easier for us, huh? Us. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The words, my chicken, circled in my head like a wasp. That's what he called me. That's what I'd been reduced to. A joke. A dumb bird who didn't know what was happening right under her nose. I heard the woman's voice on the other end of the line. Too muffled to make out the words, but her laugh was clear. Younger, brighter. I imagined her with salon-styled hair and smooth skin, wearing the kind of perfume I stopped affording years ago. I know, baby, Richard said, still chuckling. She looked so proud of herself this morning, like she's finally doing something brave. Bless her heart. That was enough. I backed out of the room like a thief. I didn't cry. Not then. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely lock the door on my way out. I didn't think. I just walked. By the time I reached the station, my legs were numb and I was soaked in sweat. Carol spotted me from the platform and ran to meet me. Did you get it? She asked, clutching my arm. You look like you saw a ghost. I got it, I said, holding up the passport. She narrowed her eyes. You sure that's all you saw? I nodded, because I couldn't say it out loud. Not yet. Not while it still echoed in my ears. My chicken flew the coop. The train pulled in. We boarded in silence. And as the wheels began to turn and Columbus disappeared behind us, I sat by the window, gripping my passport like a lifeline and stared at the horizon. I wasn't running away. I was waking up. The train ride felt like moving through a different life. As if the further we got from Columbus, the less I belonged to the version of Helen Parker who'd washed Richard's socks for 20 years without a thank you. Carol chatted beside me, flipping through a travel guide and pointing out all the places she wanted to visit. Beaches, seafood joints, nature trails. I nodded along, but my mind was still in that bedroom with that voice on the phone. We arrived in the Outer Banks just before sunset. The ocean was already whispering in the distance, a low rumble like it had been waiting all this time for me to come home. I stepped off the train and froze. The smell hit me first, salty, alive, vast. Then came the breeze, warm, humid, but different from Ohio's heat. This was wild and open and free. Carol looked at me and grinned. There she is. You're doing it, Helen. You're really here. I laughed, but it cracked somewhere in the middle. I wasn't ready for how much it would hit me. I'd gone half a century without ever seeing the ocean in person. I thought it would feel like crossing off a bucket list item. Instead, it felt like being reborn. The small inn we'd booked was right on the edge of the dunes, a two-story white clapboard building with wooden shutters and hanging flower baskets. Nothing fancy, but it had a view. Our room had a tiny balcony facing the sea. I stepped out, and for a long time I just stood there. The horizon was endless, the sky turning lavender, gulls circling above, waves curling and retreating like the pulse of the world itself. Carol came out in her beach dress, already holding a towel. "You ready?" "Ready," I whispered, eyes still locked on the water. "I've been waiting 50 years. We walked down the narrow path through the dunes, barefoot, laughing like teenagers sneaking out after curfew. The sand was soft and warm, clinging to my toes. Every step felt surreal. The waves grew louder. The sky dimmed. When we reached the shoreline, I didn't hesitate. I dropped my towel, stepped into the surf, and let the first wave crash against my ankles. "Oh my God," I gasped. "It's warm, isn't it?" Carol laughed. I kept walking, knee-deep, then waist-deep, then further until I was floating. The salt stung my skin. The water lifted me, and in that moment, something inside me unlocked. I hadn't felt lightness in years. Real, physical lightness. Like I wasn't being crushed by expectations, guilt, or other people's needs. Just me and the sea. "I'm in the ocean," I whispered to no one. "I'm finally in the ocean." Later, we sat on the sand in damp clothes, wrapped in towels, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The sky was a painting of oranges and purples. The waves shimmered in the dying light. "I'm proud of you," Carol said softly. "For what?" "For choosing yourself. For showing up." I looked at my hands. The same hands that had scrubbed floors and packed lunches and folded laundry. I barely recognized them now. They trembled less. They held warmth. Back at the inn, I stepped onto the balcony again. The moon had risen. The sea glowed silver under its light. That's when I saw him on the neighboring balcony. A man about my age, reading a book. Hair silvered at the temples. Button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves. He looked up and caught me staring. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward the ocean. "Breathtaking," I replied, caught off guard by how natural my voice sounded. He smiled. "First time." I nodded. He closed his book and leaned on the railing. "Thomas Bailey. Here solo. My wife passed a few years back. I come out here to feel human again." "Helen Parker," I said. "Also solo. Well, sort of. I'm here with a friend. Trying to remember who I used to be." Thomas tilted his head and studied me for a moment, not in a way that made me shrink, but in a way that made me feel seen. "Well," he said gently, "welcome back." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed someone meant it. The days that followed moved like water. Smooth, sunlit, and full of strange stillness. Each morning, I'd wake to the hush of waves brushing the shore, and for a brief, disoriented moment, I'd forget I wasn't home. Then I'd remember I wasn't home. I was somewhere better. Carol made it her personal mission to fill every hour with adventure. We went on boat tours, explored art galleries, and ate shrimp tacos from a food truck that parked right along the beach. She took photos of everything. The sky, the shells, even me mid-laugh, holding a plastic cup of lemonade. "You're glowing," she said one afternoon. "You look 10 years younger." I smiled, but part of me wondered if I was finally just looking like myself. On the third morning, I stepped onto the balcony early, just as the sun began to rise. The ocean blushed pink, and the breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the inn's garden below. Thomas was already there, standing with a cup of coffee in hand. He saw me and raised the mug in a quiet salute. "You made it." "Barely," I said, meaning far more than he knew. That day, Carol suggested we go inland to see an old chapel built into the cliffs. "They say the silence there is so deep it echoes," she told me, eyes dancing with mystery. We invited Thomas. To my surprise, he said yes without hesitation. I could use a quiet place," he said, "and some good company." The chapel was nestled at the edge of a mountain path, framed by ancient trees and humming cicadas. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of candle wax and cedar. I sat on a wooden pew and stared at the stained glass window glowing in the light. For a long time, none of us spoke. It was Carol who broke the silence. You ever think about how little space we make for ourselves? We live decades giving to other people, and one day we realize we don't even know what we want. I looked at her, then at Thomas, and then down at my own hands again. I think I've been living the wrong life, I said quietly. One someone else picked for me, and I just wore it like a second skin. Thomas turned to me, his eyes calm. Then maybe it's time you take it off. The words stayed with me as we drove to the waterfall afterward. It was only 15 feet tall, but the roar of it made it feel enormous. We all kicked off our shoes and waded into the shallow pool at its base. The water was cold and shocking, and I screamed when it hit my skin. Carol laughed like a child. Thomas reached for my hand. Come on, just a little deeper. I didn't even think. I followed. We stood waist deep under the fall, water pounding on our heads, and I felt years rinsing off me. Years of waiting, of silencing myself, of being small. They fell away in droplets and splashes. I feel like I'm being baptized, I said, breathless. You are, Carol grinned. Welcome to your new life. That night, we had dinner at a seafood shack lit by string lights and moonlight. Carol chatted up the local musician while Thomas and I shared a basket of grilled oysters. Tell me something real, I said to him over dessert. He leaned back, thoughtful. I used to be scared of silence. After my wife passed, it was the thing that hurt the most. Coming home to nothing. Now I think it's where I hear myself best. I stared at him. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't asking for anything. He was simply present. Afterward, walking back to the inn, our hands brushed. Not on purpose. Not exactly. Neither of us pulled away. Upstairs, Carol gave me a look when I walked in. So, she said slowly, you and Thomas? We talked, I said. That's all. But even as I said it, my cheeks warmed. And when I lay in bed that night, the ceiling fan spinning above me, I felt something in my chest I hadn't in years. Hope. Not for someone else to rescue me, but that maybe, just maybe, I could rescue myself. The morning after the waterfall, I woke up before the sun. The room was quiet, filled with the soft rustle of Carol breathing in her sleep. I slipped out of bed, wrapped myself in a thin sweater, and walked barefoot to the balcony. The sky was barely light, but the sea was already awake, rolling gently like it had no interest in drama. Only rhythm. Peace. Thomas stepped out onto his own balcony a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. I brought an extra, he called softly. I walked over to the railing. You always this prepared. He smiled. Only for neighbors worth sharing coffee with. I took it and cupped the mug in my hands. Our fingers brushed. A spark, not electric, not dramatic, but warm. Familiar. Steady. We stood there in silence for a long time, watching the light slide across the waves. And I remember thinking, I don't want to go home. But of course, home came calling. Later that afternoon, while I was folding laundry from the trip, how quickly routine sneaks back in, I got a call from Richard. I stared at the screen for a full minute before answering. Well, he said immediately, irritation thick in his voice. Nice of you to finally pick up. Hi, Richard. Don't start with that calm crap, Helen. The fridge broke. The faucet's leaking. Ethan's been calling you for 2 days. He needs rent money. And what the hell are you doing over there, anyway? I sat on the bed, staring at the half-packed suitcase I hadn't finished unpacking. I've been resting. I told you I was taking a break. Oh, you mean your little vacation? While I'm stuck here dealing with everything. I almost laughed. You mean everything I've been dealing with for 20 years while you watch TV? Jesus, Helen. You go to the beach once and come back thinking you're some kind of feminist hero. No, I said, my voice flat. I came back thinking maybe I deserve to be treated like a human being. He went quiet for a second. Then, more softly, he said, "Look, I get it. You needed time. But can we just drop the drama? Come home. We'll talk." And for a flicker of a moment, I considered it. The couch, the routines, the broken fridge, the same old expectations. Then I heard Ethan's voice downstairs. He must have let himself in. "Mom," he called. "We need to talk." I met him in the kitchen. He looked tired, or maybe just annoyed. "Aunt Sandra won't co-sign on the lease," he said. "And Amy's pregnant. We need a bigger place. Can you help us? Just until the baby comes." "You're going to be a father," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, I know. It's a lot." "Then maybe it's time you learned to stand on your own." His face fell. "Mom, come on. You always helped before." That was before I realized no one helps me. Ethan stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was. "Are you seriously saying no?" "I'm saying I'm done being the only one giving." The conversation spiraled. Richard came in. More shouting, more guilt, more familiar noise. I felt it closing in, like fog creeping under the doors. And then I said it. I want a divorce. The room went silent. Richard blinked. "You're not serious." "I am." "Helen, don't be stupid. This is just about that trip. You're emotional. You'll get over it." "No, I won't." "You're going to throw away 20 years over some fling with a beach guy." "There was no fling," I said, "but there was clarity. You don't love me. You haven't in years. You love what I do for you. You love convenience. But you haven't seen me in a long time." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Ethan looked between us, confused, frightened, suddenly realizing his mother was no longer the eternal giver. "I'm not angry," I added, "but I'm done." And that night, I packed a smaller suitcase, just the essentials. I pulled out the card Thomas had tucked into my book the last day we'd seen each other. "If you ever need peace again, call me." I didn't call. Not yet. But I placed it in my purse, zipped it up, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "We'll see." I left at dawn. The house was still. No arguing. No footsteps. No one asking where the clean socks were or when dinner would be ready. Just me, my suitcase, and the cold click of the front door closing behind me. I didn't leave a long note. Just 4 words scribbled on a torn envelope, staying with Carol. "Don't call." The street outside was damp with morning mist. I breathed in deeply, trying to remember the scent of the ocean. My hand trembled as I unlocked the car, but not from fear, from adrenaline. The kind of rush that only comes when you finally say the thing you've been swallowing for years. Carol wasn't surprised to see me, standing on her porch 30 minutes later. She opened the door with a cup of coffee already in hand. "I figured you'd come," she said softly. "Your eyes looked different the night before you left." I sat on her couch, not saying much, just letting the silence settle around me. And then I pulled out the card from my purse. Thomas Bailey, a simple font, a cell number. I stared at it for a long time. "You're thinking about calling him," Carol said, matter of fact. "I don't want to be a burden," I murmured. She laughed, not unkindly. "Helen, you've spent your whole life making sure everyone else is comfortable. Don't you think it's someone else's turn to take care of you, even just a little?" I nodded, dialed. The phone rang once, twice. "Hello." "Thomas," I said, my voice barely holding together. "It's Helen, from the beach." A pause, and then warmth. "Helen, I was hoping I'd hear from you." "Is that offer still open?" I asked, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. "About peace and space." "Always," he said. "You want to come now?" I did. God, I did. 3 hours later, I was on the train again, this time heading south. A single ticket, no round trip. The ride felt different this time. I wasn't escaping, I was choosing myself. When I arrived, Thomas was waiting at the platform. He hadn't changed much in 2 weeks. Same soft button down, same quiet, steady gaze. But when he saw me, Something flickered in his eyes. Relief or maybe joy. "You came," he said. "I did." He took my bag from my hand, not because I asked, but because he noticed I needed that small act of kindness. No one had done that in years. His house was just outside Asheville, a simple craftsman with a sloped roof and a porch that smelled like pine. Inside, it was filled with books, sunlight, and things that didn't match but somehow belonged together. It wasn't perfect. It was real. "I can stay at a hotel," I offered, standing awkwardly in the living room. He shook his head. "You're not a guest. You're welcome." And I believed him. The next few days blurred in a quiet, healing way. He showed me the trails behind his house. We sat in the garden and drank coffee. We didn't talk about the past or the future. We just existed in the now. He never asked what had finally made me leave. He didn't have to. He saw it in my eyes, in the way I exhaled every time I stepped outside, like I'd been holding my breath for 20 years. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, he made dinner: grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of chilled white wine. I hadn't had anyone cook for me since. I couldn't even remember. We sat on the porch afterward, watching the fireflies. "I'm not good at this," I said suddenly. "At what?" "Being taken care of." Thomas smiled. "Good thing I'm not trying to take care of you. Just be with you." And it was in that moment I realized something. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't managing emotions, anticipating explosions, or preparing apologies. I was just sitting beside someone who saw me. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not as a servant, just me. And I wasn't afraid. 6 months later, I stood barefoot on the back deck of a modest beach cottage in the Outer Banks. The sun had just crested the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. The breeze lifted my hair. My coffee was hot in my hands. And inside, I could hear Thomas humming as he made breakfast, off-key but soft. Familiar. The divorce had gone through with less drama than I expected. Richard didn't fight. Maybe because he finally realized I was serious. Or maybe because the effort to keep me wasn't worth it to him. Either way, I got my half of the house. Enough to buy this place. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Ethan had been furious at first. Said I was selfish. That I'd turned my back on the family. But when his daughter was born, something changed. He started calling more, less to ask for money, more to tell me stories about the baby, about Amy, about being tired, overwhelmed, unsure. I'd listen, and then I'd remind him, gently, that I'd been there once too, that I survived it, that he would too. He still didn't understand why I left the way I did. Maybe he never would. But he no longer blamed me for it, and I no longer felt the need to explain. The morning light spilled over the water as Thomas stepped out and slid his arm around my waist. "Good morning, wife," he said, pressing a kiss to my hair. I smiled. "Good morning, husband." We'd gotten married 3 months ago, quietly, just us, Carol, and a retired pastor who now ran a used bookstore. Carol cried through the whole thing, wiping her tears with a linen napkin she stole from the reception table. "I still can't believe you did it," she'd whispered during the toast. "You really left. You really chose you." "I didn't just choose me," I'd said, glancing toward Thomas. "I chose a life that fits." Now, standing on that deck, I thought about all the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit into a version of womanhood that felt like a box with no air. I thought about the dinners where no one asked me how my day was. The nights I fell asleep with my back turned, pretending Richard's snores didn't sound like chains. The mornings I woke up and immediately made a list of things to do for everyone else. And now I read books again. I plant flowers. I walk barefoot to the shoreline. I let Thomas pour me wine without guilt. We argue sometimes, but we also laugh more than I ever thought I could at this age. Not at jokes, just at the absurd, beautiful, ordinary magic of it all. "I'm glad I went back for my passport," I said softly. Thomas looked at me. "What?" "That day. I almost didn't, but if I hadn't, I wouldn't have heard that phone call. I wouldn't have seen what I needed to see. I might still be there, folding laundry in silence. He studied me for a second, then kissed my temple. Sometimes the universe sends its messages loudly. I chuckled, more like cruelly, but also clearly. We stood like that for a while, wrapped in the early light, the scent of sea air all around us. And then I said something I hadn't allowed myself to voice aloud until that very moment. I'm not angry anymore. Not at Richard. Not even at Ethan. I'm just done being small. Thomas nodded. You're not small, Helen. You never were. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to see you. I closed my eyes, let the wind move through me, and then I opened them, looked out across the water, and whispered to the waves, "Thank you for reminding me, for carrying me home." There's a sound the ocean makes at sunrise, soft, rhythmic, like the world exhaling. I sat at the edge of the shoreline, toes buried in the cool sand, and let it wash over me. Behind me, the cottage stood still and quiet. Thomas was inside, reading, probably already on his second cup of coffee. I liked that we didn't need to fill every silence. I liked that he knew when to leave space. In front of me, the water stretched out, wide and infinite. It didn't ask anything of me, didn't want anything, just was. I pulled the collar of my sweater tighter around me and looked down at the small conch shell in my hand. White, ridged, chipped at the tip. I'd found it yesterday while walking alone, just after a thunderstorm. I'd held it like it was sacred, because in some strange way it was a souvenir from a life I never thought I'd get to live. Behind me, footsteps. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. You always find the quietest spots, Thomas said, settling beside me in the sand. I smiled, maybe because I spent so many years in noise. He nodded, eyes on the water. Do you miss it? The life before? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the questions settle in me, like the tide. No, I said finally. I mourn it sometimes. Not because I want it back, but because I gave so much of myself to it. Years, energy, love, and most of it went unnoticed. He didn't speak, just reached for my hand. And yet, I added, I don't regret it either, because it made me strong enough to walk away. He squeezed my fingers gently. Later that day, we drove into town, me in a sundress I hadn't worn in years, him in one of those too soft flannel shirts he always insisted were for good moods only. We bought peaches from a roadside stand, picked up fresh bread, and at the pier, we watched a couple in their 20s arguing over which ice cream flavor to split. I smiled and thought they'll learn. Back home, I sat on the porch with Carol. She'd come to visit for the weekend. Her award to herself after finishing a brutal school year of teaching 7th graders. You know, she said, sipping white wine, you look so different now. I raised an eyebrow. Older. She laughed. No, free. I looked out at the ocean, then back at her. It's not just the beach. I know, she said. It's you. You finally let yourself exist. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the wind picking up, the scent of salt thick in the air. The kind of silence that only comes between two people who've seen each other's worst days and stayed anyway. Carol reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo. Us, age 7, sitting on her front porch, legs dangling, popsicles melting in our hands. You said that day, she whispered, that one day we'd live by the ocean. I stared at the photo, then up at the real waves crashing just beyond the dune. And here we are. She smiled, misty-eyed. I'm proud of you. I felt it again, that odd ache behind my ribs. The one that had once been loneliness, but now felt like something else. Peace. Later that night, in bed, I listened to the ocean breathe through the window. Thomas lay beside me, already asleep, one hand draped across my stomach like a promise. I looked at the ceiling and thought of all the women like me. The quiet ones, the good wives, the devoted mothers, the forgotten givers, the invisible pillars. And I hoped, desperately, that one of them, somewhere, was packing her suitcase right now. Maybe for a weekend. Maybe for good. But packing all the same. Because life isn't over at 50. Or 60. Or any age. Because you're never too old to begin again. Because sometimes all it takes is hearing your husband call you a chicken behind your back to remember you were born a phoenix. And some of us, we rise from the ocean.